Imagine being married to a man who is handsome, powerful, and utterly unknown to you. For an entire year, Ethan Thorne and Clara Hayes lived under the same roof as two strangers bound by a contract. But when distance transforms into desire and the truth threatens to destroy everything, only an honest choice can rewrite destiny. Prepare to experience an intense, elegant, and deeply moving love story. Thorne Manor stood majestically on the Connecticut Gold Coast, its arched windows overlooking the sound-like stone eyes guarding secrets. Inside, silence reigned supreme, interrupted only by the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the main drawing room. It was a silence Ethan Thorne knew well, a silence he had chosen, and one that, after 365 days of marriage, was beginning to weigh on his chest like a crushing stone. Ethan was in his study behind the massive mahogany desk that had belonged to his grandfather, his gaze fixed on the financial reports of Thorne Dynamics. The numbers danced before his eyes, but his mind was elsewhere, in the part of the house he had learned to avoid with surgical precision, the wing where his wife, Clara, lived. Her name echoed in his head, both sweet and tormenting. At 38, for the first time in his life, Ethan Thorne found himself completely disarmed by a woman. Not for lack of desire that burned in him like an unquenchable fire, but out of principle, a principle he now questioned was nobility or cowardice. The marriage had been a cold, calculated arrangement, like a corporate transaction. After the crisis that had struck the Thorne family's image, marrying Clara Hayes had been presented as the perfect solution. She, a respected conservator of historical documents from a modest but irreproachable family, would bring a touch of authenticity and culture to the Thorne name. He would provide security and stability. But what no one had calculated was the effect this woman would have on him. Ethan rose from his leather armchair, walking toward the window that overlooked the rose arbor. There, seated under the white rose pergola, Clara was reading. Even from that distance, he could perceive her natural grace, the way her chestnut hair fell over her shoulders, how the afternoon light painted golden profiles on her concentrated face. She was beautiful. He couldn't deny it. But it wasn't just physical beauty that attracted him. It was the way she lost herself in her work, the passion that shone in her eyes when she spoke of ancient archives, the quiet kindness with which she treated the household staff. She was everything he had never managed to be. Spontaneous, authentic, free. The rule he had imposed on himself on their wedding day echoed in his mind with the force of an oath. I will never touch her unless she desires it. It had been his way of protecting her, of respecting her in a situation neither of them had chosen for love. But after a year of fleeting glances, polite conversations over dinner, and nights spent staring at his bedroom ceiling knowing she slept mere yards away, that rule was starting to feel like a cage. Clara looked up just then, and their eyes met through the glass. For an instant that lasted an eternity, the world stopped. She blushed slightly, immediately lowering her gaze back to the book. As he felt his heart accelerate embarrassingly so for a man of his age and position, Ethan tore his gaze away, returning to his desk. Memories of his childhood, of parents who had turned love into a battleground of punitive silences and calculated coldness, still haunted him. He had married out of duty, exactly as they had done, and he had sworn to himself he would never allow his marriage to become another family tragedy. But Clara was not his mother, and he was no longer sure he was the man he thought he was. The sound of heels on the marble corridor made him turn. Clara had risen from the garden and entered the house. Ethan felt her every step, every movement, as if his body were tuned to a frequency only she could emit. He couldn't continue like this. He couldn't live in this house like a ghost, desiring a woman who bore his name, but whom he had never truly possessed. Something had to change, and soon. Perhaps the time had come to break the rule he had imposed. Perhaps it was time to find out if what he felt burning in his chest every time he looked at her was reciprocated, or if he was condemned to live forever in the shadow of his own respect. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his assistant, informing him about the charity gala scheduled for the following week at the Thorne Dynamics hangar, an important event featuring international investors and prominent figures. Mr. Thorne, the voice on the other end said, your wife has been invited to present her collection of antique maps for the exhibition on the history of aerospace innovation. Ethan felt something primal awaken within him, Clara, the center of attention, brilliant and desirable before hundreds of strangers. The idea filled him with unexpected pride, but also a jealousy he had never felt before. "Perfect," he replied, his voice hoarser than intended. "Ensure everything is organized flawlessly." When he hung up, Ethan knew that evening would change everything. He didn't know how yet, but he felt it in his bones, in the part of him he had kept buried for too long. The time had come to claim his wife, Clara Hayes, now Thorne. Clara gently closed the book she was reading and leaned back against the wicker chair. The manor garden was her refuge, the only place where she could forget, at least for a few hours, the strange existence she was living. 1 year, 365 days since she had spoken a yes that felt like a lie, standing before an altar decorated with flowers she hadn't chosen, wearing a dress that didn't reflect her taste, gazing into the eyes of a man she barely knew, Ethan Thorne. The name of her husband always caused a strange sensation in her chest, a mix of fascination and frustration she couldn't decipher. She had observed him from his study window just minutes before, and as always, her heart had accelerated embarrassingly. He was a man of severe, aristocratic beauty, with dark eyes that always seemed to scrutinize beyond the surface of things, and strong hands she had seen move with surgical precision over documents, but which had never touched her. Never. In 1 year of marriage, Ethan had never touched her beyond necessary formalities, helping her out of a car, offering his arm at public events, a fleeting brush of the hand during the wedding cake cutting. Everything calculated, everything respectful, everything tremendously frustrating. Clara rose and walked toward the marble fountain in the center of the garden, watching the water slide in delicate rivulets. She had married to save her family from a desperate financial situation. She knew this from the start. The Hayes family had never been wealthy, and when her father, Albert Hayes's document restoration studio, faced bankruptcy, the Thorne offer seemed like the answer to their prayers. But no one had told her she would feel like a guest in a stranger's house. The problem wasn't that Ethan was unkind to her, quite the opposite. He was always courteous, attentive to her needs, generous. He had given her carte blanche to furnish her wing of the mansion, installed a state-of-the-art restoration lab in the basement, and never restricted her expenses or movements. In every way, he was a perfect husband, except he wasn't really her husband. Clara touched her lips, remembering the chaste kiss they had exchanged at the altar. It had been the first and last kiss of their relationship. Since then, nothing. They slept in separate rooms, ate together only when guests were present, and conversed mainly about work or practical matters. And she, God help her, was going crazy, because the truth she dared not admit even to herself was that Ethan Thorne attracted her in a way she had never experienced before. It wasn't just his aristocratic beauty or the power he naturally exuded. It was the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, that burning intensity in his eyes that made something deep within her tremble. It was the way his voice softened imperceptibly when he addressed her, as if pronouncing her name were a privilege. It was the silent kindness with which he ensured she had everything she needed, without ever invading her space. Above all, it was the respect, a respect so profound and unconditional that it sometimes made her feel precious, like one of the ancient manuscripts she restored. But respect, however noble, was no longer enough. Clara re-entered the house, heading toward her studio. She had an important project to complete, a series of 18th-century aeronautical schematics that told the history of American flight exploration. It was work she was passionate about, but today she struggled to concentrate. As she delicately positioned one of the documents under the magnifying glass, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Her heart skipped a beat. She recognized those steps. Ethan was approaching her studio. She held her breath, waiting for him to knock, but the steps stopped outside the door and then walked away. As always, Clara closed her eyes in frustration. Why did everything have to be so complicated? Why couldn't she figure out what he truly thought of her? And above all, why did her body react this way every time he was near? Her phone rang, interrupting her tormented thoughts. It was Dr. Amelia Stone, curator at the National History Archives. "Clara, dear, I have exciting news for you. You've been selected to present your map collection at the Thorne Dynamics Gala next week. It will be an international event with collectors and historians from across Europe and the U.S. Clara's heart accelerated with professional excitement, but also something else she didn't want to analyze too closely. A Thorn Dynamics event meant Ethan would be present. It meant seeing him in his element, powerful and magnetic, as only he could be in business circles. "It's an incredible opportunity," Dr. Stone continued. "Your work on historical aerospace routes is groundbreaking. I'm sure you'll make a memorable impression." After hanging up, Clara sat in the silence of her studio, her heart beating loudly in her chest. For the first time in a year, she would be the center of attention at an event connected to Ethan's world, not as the silent, decorative wife, but as the competent professional she was. Perhaps the time had come to stop being an invisible presence in her husband's life. Perhaps it was time to let him see who Clara Hayes truly was. She stood up with determination, looking at her reflection in the glass cabinet holding her tools. She was 29, had a brilliant career, and a marriage that felt more like polite cohabitation. But she also had something she had never fully acknowledged, the desire to fight for what she wanted. And what she wanted, even if it terrified her to admit it, was the man who lived on the other side of that immense manor, the man who respected her so much, he dared not even touch her. The gala would be the perfect moment to start changing the rules of the game. The days leading up to the gala passed in a whirlwind of preparations that transformed Thorn Manor into a working beehive. Clara immersed herself in her presentation work with an almost feverish dedication, perfecting every detail. The antique maps she had selected told a fascinating story, the evolution of the human dream of flight, from early kite designs to pioneering aerospace ventures. But while her hands worked with precision on the delicate documents, her mind kept wandering toward the man living on the other side of the house. Ethan seemed more tense than usual. She had noticed it during their brief interactions at meals. There was something different in the way he looked at her, a new intensity that made her tremble. On Thursday afternoon, 3 days before the gala, Clara was securing the last map in its protective case when she heard a knock on the studio door. Her heart leaped to her throat. "Come in," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Ethan entered with that feline grace that characterized him, elegant even in the simple dark suit he wore for office meetings. He stopped at a respectful distance, as always, but Clara noticed his dark eyes were more restless than usual. "How are the preparations going?" he asked, his gaze settling on the maps laid out on the table. "Everything is ready," she replied, rising from her chair. "I believe it will be an interesting presentation. I am certain of it." Ethan's voice was lower than usual, almost gravelly. "Your work is extraordinary." The compliment caught her by surprise. In a year of marriage, Ethan had always been courteous and respectful, but he rarely expressed such direct admiration for her work. Clara felt the heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you," she murmured, suddenly aware of how close they were. Ethan had taken a step forward without her noticing, and now she could smell his scent, that blend of cedar and something indefinably masculine that made her head spin. "Clara," he said, and the way he pronounced her name made something deep within her tremble. I wanted to apologize." "Apologize?" She looked up, confused. "For what?" Ethan hesitated, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture that betrayed his nervousness. "For this past year. For the distance. I know it hasn't been easy for you." Clara's heart began to beat faster. It was the first time Ethan had directly addressed the nature of their relationship. The first time he had acknowledged the elephant in the room that had dominated their existence for 12 months. I believed I was doing the right thing," he continued, his gaze fixed on the antique documents, as if he couldn't look her in the eye. "I respected you. I wanted to give you space, freedom. I didn't want you to feel obligated to share your life with a man you hadn't chosen." The last word came out as a whisper. Finally, Ethan looked at her, and in his eyes, Clara saw a vulnerability she had never noticed before. Clara remained silent for a long moment, her chest rising and falling as she tried to find the right words. There was so much she wanted to tell him, so much she had kept hidden in her heart. "What if I told you," she began slowly, "that perhaps things haven't gone exactly as you thought?" Ethan stiffened, his gaze intensifying. "What do you mean?" "I mean that perhaps." Clara took a step toward him, the courage she had found in the preceding days pushing her forward. "The respect you've shown me has been the most beautiful thing a man has ever given me. But I also mean that this year of distance has been harder than you can imagine. Clara. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. I have spent 365 nights wondering what it meant to be your wife, she continued, the words pouring out like a flood after months of silence. I've spent 365 days watching you from afar, desiring. She stopped, suddenly aware of what she was about to confess. The studio seemed to hold its breath along with them. Desiring what? Ethan took another step toward her, almost completely eliminating the distance between their bodies. Desiring you to touch me, Clara whispered, her face reddening at the audacity of her words, desiring to know what it truly means to be your wife. The silence that followed was so thick that Clara could hear the drumming of her own heart in her ears. Ethan stared at her with an intensity that made her tremble, his dark eyes seeming to burn slowly. So slowly that she had all the time to stop him if she wanted. Ethan raised his hand and brushed her cheek with his fingertips. It was the first intimate touch in a year of marriage, and Clara felt an electric shock run through her entire body. Clara, he murmured, his thumb gently caressing her cheekbone. You have no idea how hard it has been to stay away from you. Then why did you? She whispered, instinctively leaning her face into his hand. Because I was afraid, Ethan admitted, his voice raw with emotion. Afraid of wanting you too much. Afraid of not being able to stop once I started. Afraid of ruining the only good thing that had ever happened to me. Clara's heart swelled with such intense emotion it took her breath away. Without thinking, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips against his. It was a soft, tentative kiss, loaded with a year of repressed longing. Ethan stiffened for an instant, as if unable to believe it was really happening. Then he cupped her face with both hands and deepened the kiss with a passion that made her tremble. When they separated, both were breathless. The gala, Ethan whispered against her lips, will be different from everything we've experienced so far. Clara smiled, feeling for the first time in a year that the real story of their marriage was about to begin. I hope so, she whispered in response. And the smile that lit up Ethan's face was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The Thorn Dynamics hangar had been transformed into a palace of glass and steel for the occasion. Hundreds of soft lights illuminated the vintage aircraft, displayed like works of art, while a red carpet guided guests toward the center of the structure, where the historical exhibition was set up. The New York and Connecticut elite moved elegantly amidst champagne and sophisticated conversations, but Ethan had eyes only for one person, Clara. He saw her before she noticed his presence, and his breath caught in his throat. She wore a midnight blue silk dress that clung perfectly to her curves, her hair gathered in an elegant chignon that left her slender neck exposed. She was radiant, the center of a group of curators and historians hanging on her every word as she explained the significance of a 17th-century schematic detailing early flight designs. For a year, he had lived with this woman without ever allowing himself to truly see her. Tonight, after the kiss in the studio 3 days earlier, a kiss that had changed everything, he couldn't take his eyes off her. Mr. Thorne, a voice interrupted him. Your wife's presentation was extraordinary. She's a true expert in her field. Ethan turned to the man who spoke, recognizing a major American investor. Clara is exceptional in everything she does, he replied, his voice laced with pride he didn't even try to hide. But while he conversed courteously with the guests, a part of him remained constantly tuned to Clara. He watched her move with natural grace, answer questions with competence and passion, and smile with that authentic sweetness that had captivated him from day one. Then he saw him. Grant Miller. Ethan recognized him immediately, though he hadn't seen him in years. Tall, blonde, with that easy smile that had always made women swoon back in college. Grant approached Clara with the confidence of someone who had the right to do so, and Ethan felt something primal awaken in his chest. Clara, I can't believe that's really you. Grant's voice carried over the din of the crowd, and Ethan saw his wife turn in surprise. Grant, what a surprise! What are you doing here? Clara's face lit up with a genuine smile. I'm collaborating with the National Archives on a research project, Grant explained, moving closer. When I heard you were presenting tonight, I couldn't miss it. Your work has always been extraordinary, but this surpasses all expectations. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. Grant wasn't simply complimenting Clara's work, the way he looked at her, the way he leaned in, the way he casually touched her arm as they spoke, everything screamed familiarity, past intimacy. "Remember studying together at the library?" Grant continued, his hand naturally resting on Clara's arm. "You were always so focused on your documents, you forgot the world around you." Clara laughed, a light silvery sound that made Ethan's heart race for reasons completely opposite to joy. "And you were always the one distracting me," she countered playfully. "Guilty," Grant admitted, smiling with the charm Ethan remembered so well from their university days. "But I have to say, you're even more beautiful than I remember." Ethan saw Clara blush slightly at the compliment, and something inside him snapped. In a year of marriage, he had never told her she was beautiful. In a year of respect and distance, he had allowed another man to easily enter her life and say the things he had never dared to utter. Grant reached for the edge of the folder Clara held, their fingers brushing in the action. It was an innocent, professional gesture, but for Ethan, it was the final straw. He moved through the crowd with determined strides, every muscle in his body tense as a violin string. Guests automatically cleared a path, recognizing the aura of power and resolve he emitted. When he arrived at the group where Clara and Grant stood, the silence suddenly grew heavier. "Grant Miller," Ethan said, his voice calm but sharp as a knife. "It's been a while." Grant turned, surprised. "Ethan, I didn't realize you were here. Congratulations on the event's success." His smile felt slightly forced. "Thank you," Ethan replied, extending his hand in a handshake that was perhaps a little too firm. "I was just coming to thank my wife for the exceptional presentation." The emphasis on "my wife" was lost on none of the attendees. "Your wife?" Grant looked genuinely surprised. "Clara, I didn't know you were married." A year ago, Ethan interjected before Clara could answer. He moved fluidly and decisively toward her, placing his hand on her waist in a gesture that was simultaneously protective and possessive. "Right, darling?" Clara looked at him in shock, feeling the warmth of his hand through the silk of her gown. It was the second time in 3 days Ethan had touched her, and every cell in her body instantly responded to the contact. "Yes," she murmured, her voice slightly shaky. "A year." Ethan's arm tightened imperceptibly around her waist, pulling her closer to his body. Clara could feel the tension emanating from him, a dark, primal energy she had never witnessed before. "Thank you for keeping my wife company," Ethan said to Grant, the tone courteous but tinged with steel. "But now it's my turn." Grant understood the message. "Of course. It was a pleasure to see you again, Clara, and congratulations to both of you." When Grant walked away, Clara turned to Ethan, her heart pounding in her chest. "Ethan, what?" "Dance with me," he said, cutting her off. It wasn't a request. Without waiting for an answer, he guided her toward the small dance floor set up in a corner of the hangar. The orchestra was playing a slow waltz, and when Ethan took her in his arms, Clara felt the world around them vanish. It was the first time they had danced together, the first time their bodies moved in harmony. Ethan's hand on her back was firm and warm, the one holding hers was strong and secure. "You're jealous," Clara whispered, looking into his eyes. "Terribly," he admitted without hesitation, his voice rough, "and I don't apologize for it." Clara's heart swelled with an emotion so intense it took her breath away. "Clara, for a year I watched you from afar," he said, their bodies moving perfectly with the rhythm of the music. "For a year I forbade myself from touching you, from desiring you, from claiming you as mine. But tonight, seeing you shine in front of all those men, seeing the way they looked at you," he paused, his jaw clenching with emotion, "I realized I can no longer live pretending that you are not the most important thing in my life." Clara stopped breathing. "You are my wife," he continued, his voice firm and determined. "And even if this marriage started as an agreement, even if we spent a year living as strangers, tonight I decided I can no longer pretend to be just your husband on paper." The music stopped, but they remained close, lost in each other's eyes. "What are you saying?" Clara whispered. "I'm saying," Ethan lowered his head until his lips brushed her ear, "that the time has come to discover what it truly means to be husband and wife." The journey back to the manor unfolded in a silence charged with electricity. Clara sat beside Ethan in the luxurious black sedan, aware of his every breath, every movement of his strong hands on the steering wheel. The air between them vibrated with unspoken tension, whispered promises, and a desire that had smoldered under the ashes for too long. "Clara," Ethan said suddenly, his voice rough in the dark cabin, "if you've changed your mind, if what happened tonight was just—" "I haven't changed my mind," she interrupted, surprised by the firmness of her own voice. "I've never wanted anything more in my life." Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel, and Clara saw his jaw clench. When they arrived at the manor, he quickly exited the car and opened her door, offering his hand with a gallantry that now tasted completely different. The moment their fingers touched, an electric shock passed through both of them. Ethan didn't release her hand as they walked toward the entrance, and Clara felt the heat of his skin like a gently burning brand. Inside the mansion, they stopped in the grand foyer, suddenly uncertain. 12 months of respectful distance weren't easily erased, even when desire burned between them like an untamed fire. "Ethan," Clara whispered, turning toward him. In the soft light of the crystal chandelier, he was even more handsome, more magnetic. His dark eyes stared at her with an intensity that made her knees tremble. "Tell me what you want," he said, slowly approaching. "Tell me what you truly desire." "You," she replied without hesitation. "I want you. I want to be your wife in every sense." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, as if wrestling with himself. When he reopened them, Clara saw a determination that made her heart race. "Are you sure?" he asked, raising his hand to gently stroke her cheek. "Because if you let me love you tonight, if you allow me to touch you as I've dreamed of doing for an entire year, there will be no going back." "I don't want to go back," Clara whispered, leaning her face into his hand. "I want to move forward with you." Ethan let out a guttural sound, halfway between a moan and a sigh of relief. Without warning, he swept her into his arms and lifted her off the ground, making her laugh in surprise. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, wrapping her arms around his neck. "To my room," he replied, starting up the stairs. "Our room, from tonight onward." Clara's heart was beating so fast she was sure he could hear it. When Ethan opened the door to his suite, she gasped. She had never been in his private rooms before, and the sight hit her. It was a decidedly masculine environment, dominated by an enormous bed with dark silk sheets, but there was also a warm, welcoming elegance she hadn't expected. Scented candles were already lit on the nightstands, and Clara wondered if Ethan had prepared them before leaving for the gala, as if he had always known this night would be different. Ethan gently set her down by the bed, his hands caressing her bare arms. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, his gaze tracing her like a caress. "For a year, I lived with the greatest temptation of my life, and I forbade myself even to tell you." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "Let me love you," he whispered, tilting his head to kiss her neck. "Let me show you how much I've desired you." The kiss that followed was entirely different from the tentative one in the studio. It was deep, passionate, loaded with a year of repressed longing. Ethan's hands got lost in her hair, undoing the elegant chignon and letting the chestnut locks fall over her shoulders. "You are perfect," he murmured against her lips, his hands tracing her face, neck, and shoulders. "Every day this year has been a sweet torture, knowing you were sleeping a few feet from me and not being able to." Clara silenced him with a kiss, her own hands beginning to explore his body through his elegant shirt. She felt his muscles tense beneath her touch, heard his breathing grow ragged. "Clara," he groaned as she began unbuttoning his shirt with trembling but determined fingers. "Are you sure?" "Don't be so noble," she whispered, smiling against his skin. "Not tonight." Ethan laughed, a deep, husky sound that made her whole body tremble. "A year of nobility is more than enough," he agreed, his hands finding the zipper of her dress. What followed was a slow, sensual dance, made of exploratory touches, kisses that gradually deepened, and whispers of pleasure and surprise. Ethan adored every inch of her skin as if it were a precious treasure, and Clara discovered her own body was capable of sensations she had never imagined. When they finally met skin to skin, the whole world seemed to shrink to that room, that bed, that perfect moment where two souls finally recognized each other. "I love you," Ethan whispered against her skin, and Clara felt those words resonate deep within her being. "I love you too," she replied. And for the first time since they married, those words were completely true. That night, Ethan and Clara Thorne ceased to be two strangers bound by a contract and finally became what they were always destined to be: two halves of a whole, husband and wife in the deepest, truest sense of the term. And when dawn began to filter through the room's curtains, finding them asleep in each other's arms, it was clear that their marriage had only just truly begun. Clara woke slowly, enveloped in a sensation of warmth and security she had never felt before. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, she couldn't figure out where she was. Then she felt the strong arm encircling her, the regular breathing against her hair, and the reality of the previous night washed over her like a gentle, overwhelming wave. Ethan. They were in his room, their room now, and she was asleep in his arms as if she had always belonged there. Turning gently so as not to wake him, Clara observed her husband's face in sleep. The severe lines that characterized his features during the day were softened by rest, his dark hair disheveled in a way that made him look younger, almost vulnerable. He was handsome. He was hers. "Good morning, Mrs. Thorne," a rough voice suddenly murmured, making her jump. Ethan's dark eyes had opened and were staring at her with an intensity that made her heart accelerate. "Good morning," she whispered, feeling her cheeks flush. It was strange, after the intimacy of the previous night, to suddenly feel shy. Ethan noticed and smiled, that rare, genuine smile that completely transformed his face. "Don't be embarrassed," he said, raising a hand to gently stroke her cheek, "not after what we shared." "I'm not embarrassed," Clara protested, then added honestly, "Well, maybe a little. It's all so new for both of us." "It's true," Ethan reassured her, pulling her closer. "But Clara, what happened last night was perfect." "Don't ruin it with anxiety," she interrupted, placing a finger on his lips. Ethan caught her finger between his lips, kissing it sweetly, and Clara felt a jolt of electricity run through her body. It was incredible how even the smallest touch from this man could ignite such intense reactions in her. "You're right," he murmured against her skin. "It was perfect. You are perfect." They kissed slowly, sweetly, without the desperation of the previous night, but with a tenderness that spoke of the future, of silent promises, and of an intimacy that was just beginning to blossom. When they separated, Ethan looked into her eyes with a seriousness that made her hold her breath. "Clara, I know this changes everything between us. I know we can no longer pretend to be just polite housemates. But I want you to know that I expect nothing from you that you are not ready to give." Clara felt her heart swell with love for this man who, even in the moment of maximum intimacy, worried about her well-being and her freedom of choice. "Ethan," she said, placing her hand on his chest, right over his strongly beating heart. "Stop protecting me from yourself. Stop deciding what's best for me without asking what I truly want." "And what do you truly want?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I want to wake up every morning in this room," she replied without hesitation. "I want to share breakfast with you, talk about work, argue over silly things like real couples do. I want this marriage to become what it always should have been." Ethan's eyes lit up with such pure joy that Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "I want that too," he said, his voice raw with emotion, "more than you can imagine." The sound of the intercom interrupted them, making them both jump. Ethan turned to the clock on the nightstand and swore under his breath. "It's 9 a.m., he said, running a hand through his hair. "I should have been at the office an hour ago." Clara laughed, finding it amusing to see him so flustered. The powerful CEO, Ethan Thorne, losing control because of a night of love, was a spectacle she would never tire of admiring. "Go," she told him, gently pushing him out of bed. "I'll take care of making breakfast." "You don't have to," Ethan began, but she silenced him with a kiss. "I want to," she said simply. "I want to take care of you." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing every detail of her face. Then he leaned in to kiss her one more time. "Tonight," he said against her lips, "we talk about everything: the future, our desires, how we want our life together to be." "Tonight," Clara agreed, smiling. After Ethan had left, Clara stayed in bed a few more minutes, wrapped in his scent that permeated the sheets. Then she got up, put on one of his shirts she found in the closet, a small but significant gesture of possession, and went downstairs to the kitchen. For the first time in a year, the manor didn't seem empty and silent. For the first time, she truly felt at home. While preparing coffee and cutting fresh fruit, Clara reflected on the previous night and how everything had changed. It hadn't just been the sex, although that had been incredible. It was the vulnerability they had shown each other, the honesty with which they had finally expressed their feelings, the way they had looked into each other's eyes and chosen to love. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Hello? Mrs. Thorne? I'm Mark Dawson from the Wall Street Journal. I wanted to congratulate you on your splendid presentation last night and ask if you would be interested in an interview about your research." Clara smiled, feeling a bubble of excitement grow in her chest. Her career was taking off. Her marriage had finally found its path, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt full of infinite possibilities. "I would be very interested," she replied, looking out the window at the garden where she had spent so many solitary hours over the past year. Soon, however, those solitary hours would become just a memory. Soon, every moment of her life would be shared with the man she loved and who finally loved her in return. The real life of Clara and Ethan Thorne had only just begun. The weeks that followed that magical night were like living in a waking dream. Clara and Ethan devoted themselves to discovering each other with the enthusiasm of two teenagers in love, yet with the maturity of two adults who had learned the value of what they were building together. Every morning began with waking up in each other's arms, with lazy kisses and caresses that often caused them to be late for their respective commitments. Ethan had started delegating more to his staff, discovering that the world didn't collapse if he wasn't in the office at 7 a.m. sharp every morning. "I can't believe you actually make coffee," Clara said one morning, watching him expertly move around their kitchen. They had decided to have breakfast together every day, a small ritual that had become sacred to both. "I have many hidden talents," Ethan countered with a mischievous smile, approaching her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "And you are discovering them all?" Clara laughed, leaning her head against his chest. I like this version of you more relaxed, more accessible. It's your fault," he whispered, kissing the top of her head. "You've made me a better man." It wasn't just the intimate moments that made this period special. It was also the complicity that grew between them in every small daily gesture. Ethan had started taking a genuine interest in Clara's work, spending hours in her studio listening to her talk about her projects with a passion that fascinated him. "This manuscript dates back to 1780, Clara explained one evening, delicately working on a particularly precious document. "See, these marks here are early calculations for a proposed flying machine." Ethan, seated next to her, watched not only the manuscript but the way her eyes shone when she talked about her work. It's incredible to think that such visions led to the creation of Thorne Dynamics centuries later. "Exactly," Clara turned to him, excited. "That's why I love this work so much. Every document I restore is a bridge between the past and the future." In those moments, Ethan realized how lucky he was to have married such an intelligent and passionate woman. Clara was not just beautiful, she was brilliant, and she was his. Their evenings became a succession of romantic dinners, walks in the moonlit garden, and long conversations about everything and nothing. Ethan discovered that Clara had a subtle sense of humor that made him laugh as he hadn't in years, while she learned to appreciate his sharp intellect and ability to see beyond appearances. "Have you ever thought about having children?" Clara asked one evening, as they lay in bed after making love. The question came out spontaneously, without premeditation. Ethan stiffened for a moment, then relaxed, stroking her hair. "Before I truly knew you? No, I thought marriage was just a duty. And children, well, another responsibility to manage. And now?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "Now." Ethan turned to look into her eyes. "The idea of seeing a tiny version of you running around this house fills me with a joy I didn't know I could feel." Clara's eyes filled with tears of happiness. "But there's no rush," he quickly added, misinterpreting her emotion. "I want us to enjoy this time, to solidify what we've built before." Clara silenced him with a passionate kiss. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you so much it sometimes scares me." "Me too," he confessed. "Sometimes I wake up and think all of this is too good to be true." But not everything was perfect in their little enchanted world. There were moments when the weight of their past made itself felt small shadows lengthening over their nascent happiness. Like when Clara received a call from her mother, who asked with the falsely enthusiastic tone she knew well, "So, darling, how are things with your husband? I hope you're doing everything you can to make him happy." Clara felt the old weight of guilt and obligation press on her chest. Her mother didn't know, no one knew, that their marriage had been just a facade for an entire year. Everyone believed they had been the perfect couple from the start. "Things are going well, Mom," she replied, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Well is not enough, Clara. This man saved you. He saved our family. You owe him everything." After hanging up, Clara sat in the studio, suddenly troubled. Ethan found her there when he returned from the office. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, noticing her expression. "Nothing important," she lied, forcing a smile. But Ethan knew her too well now. He walked over, gently taking her face in his hands. "Clara, we promised to be honest with each other. Tell me what's bothering you." She yielded, telling him about her mother's call and her words. Ethan listened in silence, his jaw clenching in anger. "Your mother is wrong," he said firmly when she finished. "You don't owe me anything. You are the one who made my life worth living." "But it's true the marriage helped my family," Clara began. "So what?" Ethan cut her off. "Do you think that diminishes what we feel for each other? Do you think the way it all started makes the love we share now less real?" Clara looked into his eyes, seeing the burning sincerity in them. "No," she whispered. "You're right, the past can't change," Ethan said, kissing her lips gently. "But the future is ours to write, and I want to write it with you every single day." That night, they made love with even greater passion, as if wanting to erase every shadow of doubt with the strength of their reciprocal desire. But in the weeks that followed, Clara couldn't completely shake off the unease. Something was bothering her, a feeling that not everything had been said about their marriage, about the reasons that had driven the two families to unite. She was happy, happier than she had ever been. But a small part of her began to wonder if their fairy tale was truly as perfect as it seemed. Soon, that feeling would prove to be more founded than she had ever imagined. The envelope arrived on a May morning, when the manor gardens were in full bloom and the air smelled of jasmine. Clara was organizing some documents in her studio when Maria, the housekeeper, knocked on the door with a worried expression. "Ma'am, this came for you," she said, handing her a plain white envelope with no return address. A courier delivered it, but wouldn't say who sent it. Clara took the envelope curiously, immediately noticing that her name was typed, with no distinguishing marks. A chill of uneasiness ran through her, but she dismissed it as nonsense. "Thank you, Maria," she said, waiting for the housekeeper to leave before opening the envelope. Inside were a few pages photocopies of documents she initially couldn't decipher. Then, as she read, the blood began to drain from her face. They were contracts, financial agreements, and at the center of everything, in black and white, was her name next to figures that made her head spin. Hayes Family Debt Extinguishment. $3 million USD. Marriage of Clara Hayes, Ethan Thorne. Clause for complete financial compensation. Rehabilitation of Thorne Dynamics public image, in exchange for Hayes family economic arrangement. The words danced before her eyes like venomous snakes. Clara sat down heavily in her chair, her hands trembling as she continued to read. There were details she had never known, figures that made her feel sick. Clauses that reduced their marriage to a commercial transaction more sordid than she had ever imagined. Her family hadn't just received help for her father's restoration studio. They had received a veritable fortune, and she had been the price. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "It can't be true." But the documents looked authentic, complete with signatures and official stamps. At the bottom of the pile was a handwritten note. "Did you really think a man like Ethan Thorne would fall in love with someone like you? You were sold, dear Clara, like a painting or an antique." The world began to spin around her. Clara sprang up, running to the bathroom where she vomited everything she had eaten for breakfast. The bitter taste of bile filled her mouth, but it was nothing compared to the bitterness invading her heart. $3 million. That was what she was worth in her family's eyes. That was what she had cost Ethan. Tears began streaming down her face uncontrollably. All those beautiful moments in the past few weeks, all those words of love, all those passionate kisses, they had been nothing but the result of guilt. Ethan felt obligated to love her because he had bought her. The sound of the car pulling into the driveway startled her. Ethan was home early from the office, as he often did lately. Clara heard his steps in the corridor, his voice calling her name with that affection that now sounded false in her ears. "Clara, where are you, love?" Love. That word she had begun to take for granted now pierced her heart like a blade. "I'm here," she managed to say, quickly wiping her eyes and hiding the documents in her desk drawer. Ethan appeared at the studio door with that smile he lately reserved only for her, the one that made her feel like the most precious thing in the world. Now she wondered if that wasn't exactly it, a precious object he had bought and was now taking care of. "Hello, beautiful," he said, approaching to kiss her, but Clara turned slightly, and his lips only brushed her cheek. Ethan stopped immediately, alerted. "Everything okay?" "Yes, just a bit of a headache," she lied, unable to look him in the eye. "Do you want me to get you something, or should we call the doctor?" The genuine concern in his voice almost made her burst into sobs. "No, thank you. I think I'll go rest for a bit." She started toward the door, but Ethan stopped her, gently taking her wrist. "Clara, are you sure everything's all right? You're pale as a ghost." For a moment, looking into his eyes, Clara was tempted to tell him everything, to show him the documents, to demand an explanation, to give him a chance to deny or explain. But then the words of the anonymous note came back to her. "Did you really think a man like Ethan Thorne would fall in love with someone like you?" "I'm fine," she said, pulling away from his grasp. "I just need to rest." That night, for the first time in weeks, they slept separately. Clara locked herself in her old room, the one she had occupied for the first year of their marriage, and cried until she had no more tears. Ethan knocked several times, increasingly worried, but she pretended to be asleep. She couldn't face him, not yet. She first had to figure out what to do with this information, how to deal with the realization that everything she believed to be real was perhaps just an elaborate setup. At dawn, she heard Ethan leave for the office. His steps in the corridor were heavier than usual, and Clara imagined the confusion and worry he must be feeling. Part of her wanted to run to him, hug him, pretend nothing had changed, but a larger part, the wounded and humiliated part, prevented her from moving. When she was sure he was gone, Clara returned to the studio and retrieved the documents. She studied them with the analytical eye of a conservator, trying to determine if they were authentic or forged, but no matter how much she examined them, they seemed real. Her phone rang, making her jump. It was Ethan. "Clara, honey, how are you? You were so distant last night." "I'm better," she lied, her voice tight. "I'm coming home early tonight. Maybe we can have dinner out, take a walk." "Actually," she interrupted, "I think I'll be working late. Don't wait up for dinner." The silence on the other end of the phone was so long that Clara thought the call had dropped. "Clara," Ethan finally said, his voice heavy with a worry that now sounded different in her ears. "Is there something you need to tell me? Something worrying you?" "No," she whispered. "Nothing important." But as she hung up, Clara knew she was lying. There was something tremendously important. She had to confront the possibility that the man she loved had never truly loved her, but had only felt obligated to because he had paid for her. And she didn't know if she would ever find the courage to uncover the truth. For 3 days, Clara avoided Ethan with the surgical precision of someone who knows every corner of the manor. She woke before dawn to have breakfast alone, secluded herself in the studio during the day, and pretended to be asleep when he returned home in the evening. It was a cruel dance that was destroying her from the inside, but she couldn't stop. Ethan, for his part, became increasingly restless. She heard him pacing the corridor outside her room at night. She saw him through the studio window pacing the garden, speaking on the phone in a tense voice. On the 4th day, she couldn't avoid him anymore. She was leaving the studio to get coffee when she found him waiting for her in the corridor, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He looked like he hadn't slept for days, his hair messy and his beard longer than usual, but his eyes were determined, and Clara understood that the reckoning had arrived. "Enough," he said, his voice firm but not aggressive. "I don't know what happened, but this silence is killing us both. Let's talk." "There's nothing to talk about," Clara murmured, trying to pass him. Ethan stopped her, gently taking her arm. "Clara, please. These past weeks, we learned to be honest with each other. Don't throw everything away out of pride." "Pride?" The word left Clara's lips like a whip. "You think this is pride? Then tell me what it is," Ethan implored. "Tell me what I did wrong. How can I fix it?" Clara looked at him for a long moment, seeing the sincere desperation in his eyes. Part of her wanted to give in, wanted to throw herself into his arms and pretend the documents didn't exist. The other part, the wounded and humiliated part, took over. "Follow me," she said dryly, heading back to the studio. Once inside, she opened the desk drawer and pulled out the envelope with the documents. Ethan paled as he recognized it, and Clara immediately knew he understood what it contained. "So it's all true," she said, her voice trembling. $3 million. That's what I cost." Ethan closed his eyes, running his hands over his face. "Clara, let me explain." "Explain what?" she interrupted, tears beginning to flow. "That I was sold by my family like an antique object? That you bought me to fix your public image? It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me," Clara shouted, all the rage and pain she had held inside for days suddenly exploding. "Explain how it's not simple to be paid to marry someone." Ethan moved closer to her, but Clara backed away. "Don't touch me," she whispered. "Don't you dare touch me." "Clara, listen to me," he said, his voice desperate. "Yes, there was a financial exchange. Yes, the marriage was part of an agreement. But I didn't know. I didn't know all the details." "What details didn't you know?" she asked, her voice venomous. "I didn't know the extent of the money involved. I didn't know your family presented the situation as if you fully consented to the financial arrangement. And that changes something." Ethan looked into her eyes, and for the first time since she had known him, Clara saw fear in those dark eyes. "It changes everything because it means we were both deceived. We were both used." "You got what you wanted," Clara countered bitterly. "A respectable wife, a clean image, a united family for the papers." "What I wanted," Ethan burst into a bitter laugh. "Clara, what I wanted was to die inside every night for a year, desiring you and not being able to even look at you without feeling like a monster. What I wanted was to live in the hell of unrequited desire." "Don't say that," Clara whispered, shaken by the passion in his voice. "It's the truth." Ethan took a step toward her. This time, she didn't retreat. "Do you really believe a man can fake what we've shared? Do you really believe I could have faked every kiss, every touch, every time I told you I love you?" "I don't know anymore," Clara confessed, tears streaming freely down her face. "I don't know what to believe." "Then believe me when I tell you this." Ethan took her face in his hands, forcing her to look into his eyes. "I will go to my lawyer tomorrow morning. I will uncover every detail of this agreement, every hidden clause, every lie we were told, and then we will decide together what to do. And if we find out it's all true, that our marriage was born from a lie, then we will start over," Ethan said firmly. "We will annul everything and start anew. I will court you as you deserved from the start. I will marry you again, this time for love, and only for love." Clara stared at him, her heart beating hard in her chest. "Would you really do that?" "I would do anything for you," he whispered. "Anything to prove to you that what we feel is real." For a moment, Clara was tempted to yield, to throw herself into his arms and be convinced by his passionate words. But the pain was too fresh, the wound too deep. "I need time," she said, pulling away from him. "I need to understand who I am when I'm not the wife someone bought." Ethan's face contracted in pain, but he nodded. "I will give you all the time you need, but Clara, don't throw away what we built. Don't let the lies of others destroy the truth of our love." Clara didn't answer. She couldn't, because deep down, she was afraid that the truth Ethan spoke of was just another illusion in a life that seemed to be built entirely on foundations of sand. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He remained in his study until dawn, digging through documents, contracts, and agreements he had signed 2 years earlier without fully reading. Every page he turned revealed details that made him feel increasingly sick and furious. At 7 a.m., he called his personal attorney, Marcus Giuliani, urgently summoning him to the manor. When the man arrived, Ethan had a stack of documents before him and an expression Marcus had learned to fear over the years of collaboration. "Marcus, "I want you to explain every single clause of this damned marriage contract," he said without preamble, "and I want to know who knew what and when." The lawyer began examining the documents, his face growing increasingly grave. "Ethan, many of these clauses were not in the main contract you signed. It seems there was a parallel agreement between your father, Arthur Thorne, and the Hayes family." "What kind of agreement?" "An agreement that provided for the complete liquidation of the Hayes family debt in exchange for the marriage. But what is more serious is that it appears they led Clara to believe it was only assistance for her father's studio." Ethan felt the blood freeze in his veins. "Are you saying she was also deceived?" "Exactly. And there's more. Look at this clause here." Marcus pointed to a paragraph at the bottom of the document. "If the marriage were annulled within the first 2 years, the Hayes family would have to repay the entire sum with interest." "That's why they never told me anything," Ethan murmured, beginning to understand. "That's why everyone was so invested in making the marriage work." The lawyer continued reading, shaking his head. "Ethan, this contract is a masterpiece of manipulation. Both of you were maneuvered to stay together, regardless of your feelings." "Who else knew?" Ethan asked, his voice hard as steel. "Your father, certainly. Clara's father, Albert, and probably their lawyers." Ethan stood abruptly, starting to pace the study. "I need to speak to my father immediately." 2 hours later, Ethan was sitting in the office of Arthur Thorne, the family patriarch, in downtown Manhattan. The older man looked at him with that cold, calculating gaze Ethan remembered from childhood. "You always knew," Ethan said without mincing words, throwing the documents onto the desk. "You always knew everything." Arthur barely glanced at the papers. "Of course. It was a good deal for both families." "A good deal?" Ethan's voice rose dangerously. "You sold your son to fix the company image. And you got a perfect wife," his father coldly countered. "A smart, beautiful woman from a good family. What more could you want?" "Love," Ethan shouted, standing up. "The right to choose." Arthur laughed bitterly. "Love? You're 38, Ethan. You had all the time in the world to find love, and you chose to focus only on work. I simply solved 2 problems with 1 solution." "And Clara? Did you know she didn't know the details of the agreement?" For the first time, Arthur's expression wavered slightly. "The Hayes assured us she was agreeable." "Liars!" Ethan spat. "All of you, manipulative liars." "Ethan, calm down. In the end, things worked out. You married a good girl. The company overcame the crisis. The Hayes were saved from bankruptcy. Everyone won." "Everyone but us," Ethan countered, heading toward the door. "Everyone but the 2 people who had to live this farce." "Where are you going?" Arthur asked. "To tell my wife the truth. All of it." When Ethan returned to the manor, he found Clara sitting in the garden, in the same spot where he had watched her for an entire year before finding the courage to approach. She was pale, the signs of tears still visible on her face. "I found out everything," he said, sitting beside her without asking permission. Clara looked at him, her eyes filled with a sadness that broke his heart. "My father knew you didn't know the financial details. Your father lied to mine, making him believe you were fully aware and agreeable to everything." "So, we were both deceived," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. "We were both used as pawns in a game bigger than us." They remained silent for long minutes, the weight of the truth settling between them like a crushing stone. "What do we do now?" Clara finally asked. Ethan turned to her, taking her hands in his. "We decide who we want to be. Can we let the lies of others define our future? Or can we choose to write our own story?" "How?" "Let's get married again," Ethan said firmly. "This time by choice. This time for love. This time knowing exactly who we are and what we want." Clara looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time in days, Ethan saw a spark of hope in her eyes. "And if people find out the truth, then we'll face that together too," he replied. "I'm no longer afraid of the truth, Clara. I'm only afraid of losing you." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in days, Ethan felt that perhaps they could overcome even this. The days that followed were a delicate balance between hope and uncertainty. Clara and Ethan began rebuilding their relationship from the foundations, this time with full awareness of everything that had brought them together. It wasn't easy. Every gesture of affection was followed by doubt. Every moment of intimacy was tainted by the awareness of their complicated past. "Clara," Ethan said one evening, while they were having dinner together for the first time since she discovered the truth, "I know it's hard to trust again. I know that every time I tell you I love you, a part of you wonders if it's real." Clara put down her fork, looking him in the eyes. "It's true, but I'm learning to distinguish between the man who married me out of duty and the one I've gotten to know in these weeks." "We are the same person," Ethan said gently, "just that now I'm no longer afraid to show you who I truly am." The turning point came a week later, when Clara received an unexpected phone call. It was her father, Albert Hayes, and his voice was trembling with nervousness. "Clara, I need to see you. There's something I have to tell you." They met at a small cafe in downtown Greenwich, away from prying eyes. Albert looked like he had aged 10 years, his hair gayer, his shoulders slumped under the weight of something that was clearly tormenting him. "Dad, what's wrong?" Clara asked, worried. "It's all my fault," he said, tears starting to trace paths down his face. "I ruined everything. I ruined your life." "What are you talking about?" Albert pulled some documents from his bag, the same ones Clara had received in the anonymous envelope. "I was the one who sent these to you. I couldn't live with what we had done anymore." Clara stared at him, shocked. "That was you? When the marriage was proposed, they told us you were agreeable, that you knew everything. Only later, much later, did I realize it wasn't true, that we had lied to you." "Dad," Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "The debts were real, Clara. I was about to lose everything, the studio, the house, everything I had worked for my entire life. When Arthur Thorne offered that solution, it seemed like a miracle. But why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid you would say no," Albert confessed, ashamed. "Because it was easier to make everyone believe you agreed than to admit I was selling my daughter." Clara felt tears sting her eyes, but strangely, she no longer felt the burning anger from before. Seeing her father's sincere pain, she understood that he, too, had been a victim of circumstances. "Dad, what's done is done," she said, taking his hand. "But tell me the truth now. Did Ethan know?" "No," Albert replied firmly. "Arthur told him you were aware of everything. Ethan always believed you were marrying him by choice." That evening, Clara returned home with a heart lighter than it had been in weeks. She found Ethan in his study, hunched over work documents, and for the first time in days, she approached him without hesitation. "My father confessed everything," she said, placing her hands on his shoulders. Ethan turned immediately, reading the resolution in her eyes. "And now?" "Now I know for sure that we were both victims of the same deception," Clara replied, "and I also know that what we've built together in these weeks is real." Ethan stood up, taking her face in his hands. "Clara, I want you to know that even if I had married you only for convenience, even if there had never been love from me at the beginning, what I feel now is so intense that it erases everything else." "I know," she whispered. "I know too." They kissed with a passion that tasted of new beginnings, of truth finally revealed, of love chosen rather than imposed. "Marry me again," Ethan said against her lips. "Marry me because you want to, not because you have to." "Yes," Clara replied without hesitation. "But this time, I want a real proposal." Ethan laughed, that deep, genuine sound she loved so much. "Then prepare yourself, Mrs. Thorne, because I'm about to court you like no man has ever courted a woman." "I can't wait," Clara whispered, and for the first time since discovering the truth, she felt that the future was truly theirs to write. 2 days later, Ethan disappeared for the entire day, saying only that he had important things to settle. When he returned that evening, he had an expression so determined and happy that Clara couldn't contain her curiosity. "Where have you been all day?" "Buying a ring," he said with a smile that made her heart race. "A ring I choose, for a woman I choose, for a marriage we both choose." That night, as she fell asleep in Ethan's arms, Clara knew they were about to begin the most beautiful chapter of their story, a chapter written not by duty or circumstance, but by pure love and the conscious choice of two people who had learned to recognize the truth when they saw it. Ethan had planned everything in meticulous detail. For a week, he had secretly organized what would be the most important moment of his life the second time, but this time by choice. On Saturday morning, when Clara woke, she found a note on the nightstand written in Ethan's elegant handwriting. "I'll be waiting for you in the place where everything truly began, where I first saw you as I needed to see you." Clara smiled, her heart starting to beat faster. She knew exactly where to go. The Thorn Dynamics hangar had been transformed. Soft lights created an intimate atmosphere, and in the center of the space was a display that took her breath away. Her antique maps, the ones she had presented at the gala, were arranged as if it were a private exhibition, illuminated by candles that cast dancing shadows on the historical documents. Ethan was there, elegantly but not formally dressed, and when he saw her enter, his face lit up with that smile she now knew was completely authentic. "Welcome to our true story," he said, walking toward her. "Ethan, it's magnificent," Clara whispered, looking around. "But why here?" "Because this is where I first realized I was hopelessly in love with you," he replied, taking her hands. "It's where I stopped pretending that what I felt was only respect or conjugal duty." He guided her through the exhibition she herself had curated, but now every piece had a different meaning. "Do you know what these maps represent to me now?" Ethan asked. "They represent the journey we took together from uncertain first explorations to the discovery of new territories of the heart." Clara felt tears sting her eyes with emotion. Ethan stopped in front of the map she loved most, the one showing the early aerospace designs. "They dreamed of flying," Ethan said, "but they couldn't imagine that centuries later someone would use their visions to build something so beautiful." He gestured to the surrounding aircraft. "Just as I couldn't imagine that a marriage born of an agreement could transform into something so perfect." Ethan knelt before her, pulling out a small velvet box. Clara raised her hands to her mouth, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Clara Hayes," he said, opening the box to reveal a diamond ring that caught the candlelight, creating 1,000 rainbows. "A year ago, I married you out of duty. Today, I want to marry you out of love." Tears began streaming freely down Clara's face as she listened to the words she had dreamed of hearing. "I love you for how your eyes light up when you talk about your work. I love you for the kindness with which you treat every person you meet. I love you for how you made me a better man without even trying." Ethan paused, his voice growing rougher with emotion. "I love you for how you forgave the lies that brought us together and for how you chose to see the truth in what we feel. Clara, will you marry me again? This time forever. This time by choice." "Yes," Clara whispered, then louder. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Ethan stood up, slipping the ring onto her finger with hands trembling slightly with emotion. It was perfect, elegant without being excessive, exactly what she would have chosen for herself. They embraced and kissed with a passion that tasted of new beginnings, promises kept, and love finally free to express itself without shadows of the past. "I've already spoken to the justice of the peace," Ethan said against her lips. "We can have a civil ceremony next week, just us and the witnesses, or we can wait and organize something bigger." "Just us," Clara replied immediately. "I don't want to wait another day to truly be your wife." "And for the honeymoon," Ethan continued with a mischievous smile. "I was thinking Paris. There's a collection of medieval manuscripts at the Louvre that I know you're dying to see." Clara burst out laughing, incredulous. "Are you planning the honeymoon around my work?" "I'm planning the honeymoon around what makes you happy," he corrected. "And if what makes you happy are ancient manuscripts, then we'll see the most beautiful manuscripts in the world." "I love you," Clara said, hugging him tightly. "I love you so much it sometimes scares me." "Don't be afraid," Ethan whispered, stroking her hair. "Not of this. Not of us." That evening, as they returned to the manor, hand in hand, Clara looked at the ring sparkling on her finger and smiled. It was strange to think that a year earlier, she had married this same man feeling nothing, and now she couldn't imagine life without him. "Ethan," she said suddenly, "do you think we would have reached this point anyway, even if we had met differently?" Ethan thought for a moment. "You know what I think? I think two souls destined to find each other always do, regardless of the circumstances. Maybe not in the most conventional way, but they find each other." "So you believe in destiny?" "I believe in us," he replied, stopping to kiss her under the starlight, "and that is more than enough for me." The ceremony took place on a June morning in the manor garden, which had become the silent witness to their entire story. It was small, intimate, perfect. Just the two of them, the justice of the peace, Marcus as Ethan's best man, and Clara's closest friend, Dr. Stone, as her witness. Clara had chosen a simple ivory silk dress, very different from the sumptuous gown of their first wedding. This one truly represented her elegant but not ostentatious, beautiful in its simplicity. Ethan wore a dark blue suit that accentuated his eyes, and when he saw her walk toward him among the garden roses, his face lit up with such pure joy that Clara felt her heart swell with love. "Are we sure we want to do this again?" he joked when she took his hand. "People might think it's strange to marry the same person twice." "Let them talk," Clara replied with a radiant smile. "Do they know what it means to love someone so much that you want to choose the same person every single day?" The vows they exchanged were completely different from the formal ones of the first marriage. They were words from the heart, promises born of experience and awareness. "Clara," Ethan said, holding her hands in his, "a year ago I promised you respect and protection. Today I promise you my entire self. I promise that every day I will choose to love you, even when it's difficult. I promise there will be no more secrets between us, only truth and trust." Clara's eyes filled with tears as she replied, "Ethan, a year ago, I spoke words I didn't feel. Today, every word comes from the bottom of my heart. I promise to walk by your side as your equal, to support you in difficult times, and to celebrate the beautiful ones with you. I promise to love you not for what you can give me, but for who you are." When the justice of the peace declared them husband and wife again, they kissed as the guests applauded, but for them, only that perfect moment existed under the June Sunday. The small celebration that followed was cheerful and light-hearted. Dr. Stone, who knew the whole story, raised a toast that made everyone laugh. To Clara and Ethan, who proved that sometimes you have to get married twice to do it right. That evening, as they were alone in their newly renovated master suite, Clara had insisted on redecorating it together. Eliminating all traces of the past, they made love with a passion that was both familiar and completely new. "Mrs. Thorne," Ethan whispered against her skin, "how does it feel to be married for the second time?" "Like it's the first time that truly counts," she replied, caressing his face, as if everything that came before was just a dress rehearsal for this moment. 3 days later, they left for Paris, and Ethan kept his promise to make the honeymoon perfect for her. They spent entire mornings at the Louvre, where Clara got lost among ancient manuscripts and codes, while he watched her with the adoration of a man completely in love. "Aren't you bored?" she asked him one afternoon, while they were in the medieval art section. "Are you kidding?" Ethan replied, kissing her temple. "Watching you do what you love is my favorite show." They spent their evenings strolling along the Seine, dining in small hidden bistros, discovering the city together like any newlyweds. It was everything their first marriage had not been: spontaneous, joyful, filled with small moments of daily intimacy. One evening, as they were sitting at a café in Montmartre, Clara received a call from the director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. They wanted to offer her the position of head curator for a new exhibition on Italian Renaissance manuscripts. "It's an incredible opportunity," she told Ethan after hanging up. "New York for at least 6 months? Then we'll move to New York," he replied without hesitation. "Ethan, you can't leave the company for 6 months." "I can do anything," he interrupted, taking her hands across the table. "The company can run without me for a while, and Marcus can handle everything, but I can't function without you." Clara looked at him with eyes full of tears and gratitude. "Are you sure, Clara? I spent 38 years of my life putting work first. Now I know what it means to have a more important priority." That night in their Parisian hotel, they made love with a passion that celebrated not only their present love, but all the future possibilities opening up before them. "I love you, my husband," Clara whispered in the darkness of the room. "And I love you, my wife," Ethan replied, holding her tight. "Forever and forever again." This time, as they fell asleep embraced, both knew they had overcome the hardest test life could put before them. They had found the truth behind the lies, the authentic love behind the facade, and above all, they had chosen to build something beautiful together, despite everything. Their marriage had finally truly begun, and the future had never looked so bright. 2 years later, Clara woke up in their Manhattan home with the sun filtering through the large windows of the loft they had chosen together. Beside her, Ethan was still asleep, a protective arm around her waist. Even in sleep, he never stopped keeping her close. She smiled, delicately stroking the hand resting on her still flat abdomen. In a few hours, she would tell him the news she had been keeping secret for 3 days. They were expecting a baby. Their life in New York had been a wonderful adventure. The project at the Metropolitan had exceeded all expectations, and Clara had established herself as one of the museum's most respected curators. Ethan had kept his promise, dividing his time between New York and Connecticut, proving that love and work could coexist perfectly when there was balance. "Good morning, beautiful," Ethan's rough voice murmured. He had woken up and was looking at her with those dark eyes that still made her heart accelerate. "Good morning, my husband," she replied, turning to kiss him. It was Sunday, their sacred day. They had established a tradition of spending Sunday mornings in bed, talking, laughing, planning, and making love without haste. It had become the most precious time of their week. "I have a surprise for you," Clara said, sitting up in bed with a mysterious smile. "What kind of surprise?" Ethan asked, immediately intrigued. Clara took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "The kind of surprise that will change our lives forever." Ethan looked at her for a moment without understanding. Then his eyes widened as he realized, "Clara, are you saying that?" "I'm saying that in 7 months we'll have a permanent guest," she whispered, tears of joy beginning to flow. Ethan's face lit up with such intense happiness that Clara thought her heart might explode. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around even though they were still in bed, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby?" he kept repeating. "We're having a baby. Are you happy?" Clara asked, although the answer was evident. "Happy." Ethan kissed her passionately. "Clara, I'm more than happy. I'm complete." They spent the morning planning, imagining what their life would be like with a child, discussing whether to stay in New York or return to Connecticut. "The manor has that wonderful garden," Ethan said. "A child should grow up running among the roses and climbing trees." "But New York has incredible cultural diversity," Clara countered. "Museums, theaters, infinite opportunities." "We have time to decide," Ethan concluded, stroking her belly. "The important thing is that we'll be together." In the afternoon, they went to Central Park, as they did every Sunday, and sat on their favorite bench near the lake. It was there that Ethan had first told her "I love you" in English, as a joke, claiming it sounded different in a foreign language. "Do you know what I was thinking?" Clara said, leaning against his shoulder. "What?" "How strange it is to think that if things had gone differently, if there hadn't been lies and deception, maybe we would never have truly fallen in love." Ethan thought about it for a moment. "Do you think we would have continued to live as polite strangers? Maybe you were so determined to respect me that perhaps you would never have allowed yourself to get close. And you were so convinced I was only a husband in name that perhaps you would never have let down your guard." They looked into each other's eyes, both struck by the same realization. "So, perhaps," Clara said slowly, "those lies were paradoxically the best thing that ever happened to us." "Because they forced us to confront the truth," Ethan agreed. "They forced us to choose consciously, and we chose love." "We chose love," he repeated, kissing her forehead. That evening, as they cooked together in their Manhattan kitchen, Ethan had discovered a hidden talent for making homemade pasta. The phone rang. It was Marcus from Connecticut. "Ethan, I have some news you'll be interested in," the lawyer's voice said. "Arthur wants to see you. He says it's important." After hanging up, Ethan remained thoughtful. He hadn't spoken to his father in months, not since the furious argument they had when he discovered the truth about their marriage. "Do you want to go?" Clara asked. "Only if you come with me," he replied. "I'm not facing anything without you anymore." 2 weeks later, they were in Connecticut, in the manor that now seemed small after the vast spaces of New York. Arthur was waiting for them in the drawing room, and Clara was surprised to see how much he had aged. The man she remembered as proud and intimidating now seemed fragile, diminished. "Ethan," the old man said when they entered. "Clara, thank you for coming." "What did you want to tell us, Dad?" Ethan asked, his voice neutral. Arthur hesitated, then spoke in a voice Clara had never heard from him, humble, almost fearful. "I wanted to apologize to both of you. I've spent these months reflecting on what I did, on how I manipulated your lives, and I realized I got everything wrong." Ethan and Clara exchanged a surprised look. "I believed I knew what was best for you, Ethan. I believed love was a luxury we couldn't afford. But looking at you now, seeing how happy you are together, I understand I nearly destroyed the most beautiful thing that ever happened to you." The older man's eyes filled with tears. "I hope that someday you can forgive me, and I hope you can allow an old fool to be a part of the life of the child you're expecting." Clara gasped. "How do you know?" "It shows in your eyes," Arthur said with a sad smile. "You have the same glow your grandmother had when she was expecting Ethan." Ethan looked at his father for a long moment, then approached and hugged him. "Dad, that's the past. What matters is the future." "And the future includes family," Clara added, taking Arthur's hand. "This baby will need its grandfather." That evening, as they walked in the moonlit manor garden, Clara and Ethan stopped at the exact spot where they had married the second time. "Do you realize," Clara said, "that in a few years, this garden will be full of children's laughter?" "And do you realize," Ethan replied, pulling her into his arms, "that I can't even imagine what my life was like before you?" They kissed under the stars, two people who had learned that true love isn't what comes easily, but what is chosen every day, what survives the lies and thrives in the truth. "I love you, Ethan Thorne," Clara whispered. "And I love you, Clara Thorne," he replied. "Forever and ever again." As they walked back to the house, hand in hand, both knew their story had only just begun. They had built something indestructible, a love that had overcome every challenge and was now ready for the greatest adventure of all, being a family.